Mary Will I Die by Sean Sarles, starting on page 1. Prologue. Alina. She knew she should have been scared. She should have been curled up in a ball, her hands thrown over her head for protection, cowering in a basement, sheltering in place. That was where everyone else would be right now. But for what? How many times had the sky turned black and the winds blown hard? How often had the clouds steepled into angry, furrowed masses threatening to unleash Armageddon? And yet, the sun always came out 15 minutes later. The danger never materialized, never did any damage. A siren started wailing outside. It cut through the howling wind that rattled every window in the house. "We should go back downstairs," a voice whimpered from behind Alina. "Don't be such a baby," Alina snapped at Grace, her best friend, though sometimes she wondered how much longer page 2, how much longer she'd be able to put up with the girl. "Nothing's going to happen." "I don't know," another girl spoke up. "It sounds pretty bad out there." "I think Steph's right," a boy added, his glasses sliding down his nose so that he had to keep pushing them back up over and over again. "Fine. Go back to your boring lives." Alina was so over them. All three of them. Grace, Steph, and Calvin. Her carpool buddies, though she was only actually friends with Grace. They were all in the same 4th grade class, and her mom had picked them up early today because of the storm warning. But if you want to see something cool and prove that you're not a scaredy cat, then follow me. At first, no one responded to Alina's challenge, but then Grace took the bait, like Alina knew she would. "Cool like what?" she asked, her voice a nervous whisper. "You're about to find out." Alina's mouth split into a wicked grin, and she started down the hallway, glancing over her shoulder, satisfied when Grace's surrender dominoed into Steph's and Calvin's. All three were following her now, marching up to the closed door in single file. "What's in there?" Grace squeaked. "A ghost." Page 3. Alina delighted in the shiver that shook Grace. She shocked wait a second, I'm going to start over on that page. Alina delighted in the shiver that shook Grace, the shocked O rounding the girl's lips. Then, before anyone could recover, she reached up and twisted the handle, swinging the door open and revealing the black cavern of a room. She slipped inside and waited for them to join her. Lightning flickered beyond the curtain windows, the flash spotlighting the room in black and white. It pulsed again, and this time someone yelped as a shrouded figure lunged out of the shadows. Grace threw herself into Alina as she dove for the door. Before she could bolt, though, Alina reached over and pulled the string on an old lamp. Its golden glow filled the room and revealed the ghostly figure for what it was. A piece of furniture, a sheet thrown over it to keep off the dust. "It's only a bedroom," Steph commented, and a frown wrinkled her forehead. "It's not," Alina said. The wind howled against the windows as Alina paused, relishing what would come next. "It's my grandmother's room. At least, it was." An eerie calm settled around them, like they'd suddenly been sucked into the eye of a tornado. Alina could almost feel her ears pop as the air pressure shifted and grew brittle. "When did she die?" Calvin asked, his voice hushed. "A few months ago," Alina said. "I'm sorry," Steph mumbled. "Don't be," Alina replied before she could check herself. Page 4. Before she realized how heartless it sounded, she was pretty old and out of it at the end. That was true, at least. In those last few weeks of her life, Alina's grandmother had spiraled into a ghoul. Her fingers had narrowed into hooked talons. Her hair stuck straight out from her head in patchy white wisps. Nonsense had rattled from her mouth day and night and day, a feverish rant, her native German only broken up here and there by a random English word. But even those Alina could hardly understand. Her mom had tried to explain it to her. Something called dementia. It stole her grandmother's memories, twisted them, made her see things that weren't there, made her rant at the very air in front of her face. Invisible enemies hiding in the shadows. And all this is hers? Grace asked, her question quiet. Reverent. Alina had talked about the woman with Grace, but they'd never actually met. And Alina hadn't told her when her grandmother had passed. She hadn't even invited her to the funeral. It was, Alina replied. Her grandmother had moved in near the end, bringing with her a few of her most prized possessions, which reminded Alina. Before anyone could say another word, she flounced across the room and grabbed the edge of the hanging sheet, tugging on the fabric and letting it unfurl. The shroud flowed to the floor and pooled around the wooden legs of the imposing relic, revealing the boogeyman for what it was, a mirror. Page 5. We're on the second line. That looks really old, Calvin marveled, the first to find his voice. And expensive, Steph piped up, moving in to get a closer look. Are those real? Tentatively, the girl reached forward but stopped, her finger hovering less than an inch above one of the pearl-like orbs inset all the way around the mirror's flawless glass. I don't know, Alina replied. It's been in my grandmother's family for generations or something. Are these hers too? Grace asked, her pipsqueak voice interrupting Alina, who spun around and saw the girl fingering the knickknacks on top of the dresser. The antique silver rings and necklaces that could use polishing, a photo album, and some old books. Yeah, it was all hers. Cool. The word was barely audible as Grace continued to sift through it all. Alina tapped her foot in the middle of the room, crossing her arms as she turned and saw Calvin still mesmerized by the mirror, his nose an inch from the glass. This wasn't much fun anymore. Not for her. They were supposed to be shocked and scared. They might as well have stayed downstairs. But then, as Alina was about to suggest that they wrap things up, she caught a movement in the mirror. Her own annoyed face, moving to page 6, her own annoyed face reflected behind Calvin's, but there was a twinkle in her eye, a smirk on her lips, and suddenly an idea struck her. Let's play a game, Alina said, her voice coaxing everyone to listen. It's called Bloody Mary. The light in the room dimmed and the wind picked up outside, howling against the side of the house, reminding everyone that there was a storm brewing. Alina pushed Calvin aside and stepped in front of the mirror. It's simple, as long as you don't scare easily. And Alina went on to explain the rules. All you have to do is stare into the mirror, right at your reflection, and then you say, Bloody Mary, 13 times. She didn't know where this had come from. It was almost like a spirit was standing right behind her, whispering the directions into her ear for her to repeat. But it sounded good. It sounded scary. What happens then? Steph asked, clearly unimpressed by the game. Well, you wait. Alina strung it out to buy some time, examining her own reflection as if her mirror version might have the answer. And then Bloody Mary shows you your soulmate's face. Alina liked that, especially since she'd come up with it on the spot. But it needed more. Something extra. Something twisted. Or, Elena began, you'll see Bloody Mary's horrible face, a sign that you're going to die young. Maybe even tonight. Page 7. And a clap of thunder crashed overhead, adding that perfect exclamation point to her words. Here, I'll go first. Before anyone could protest or call her silly, Alina stepped right up to the mirror, looked at her reflection dead in the eye, and started speaking. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. The name rolled off her tongue like some kind of incantation, and everyone in the room was under its spell, sucking in their breaths as they waited to see what would happen. Even the storm outside seemed to be listening. Bloody Mary. As she spoke the name for the 13th time, Alina rose up on her tiptoes, leaning closer to the mirror so that her nose almost grazed the glass. Her gaze pierced through her reflection, looking for something, anything. Even she had gotten swept up in her game. Even she believed that Bloody Mary might reveal something to her. With a blinding flash and a violent crack, the storm broke back into the room. Alina jumped and Grace let out a whimper. Then something above them snapped, and the room was suddenly plunged into complete darkness. Alina could hear the others panicking around her. Grace's soft keening, Steph's sharp gasp, Calvin's pitchy yelp. But none of that mattered, because she'd seen something. She swore it. Moving to page 8. There, in that split second before the lights had gone out, there'd been a face. A boy from her class. One she had a crush on. Henry. Her soulmate. Did you see that? Alina spun around, fishing her phone out of her pocket so that she could use the flashlight app. There was a face in the mirror. But no one else seemed to believe her. We must have missed it when the lights went out. Alina sounded disappointed, but she wasn't defeated. Here, one of you go. I think we should head downstairs, Steph replied. Your mom will probably be looking for us, and I don't want to get in trouble. Alina frowned, but then Grace stepped up. I'll go. Her hand dipped nervously into one of the pockets of her skirt, but she took her place in front of the mirror. She peered into it, using Alina's phone to see, and spoke the name just like the other girl had, pausing after the 13th time and holding her breath. Did you see anything? Alina asked after a couple of seconds. Grace's cheeks had turned bright red, but she only shook her head as she shuffled back, doing her best not to make eye contact with anyone. Calvin, give it a try. And Alina pushed the boy in front of her, holding the light, page 9, up again as she coaxed him into repeating the name. As it crossed Calvin's lips for the last time, he suddenly froze, the color draining completely from his face. Who'd you see? Alina asked, because once again she hadn't spotted anything in the mirror. No one, Calvin stuttered. There wasn't anything there. Can we go now? Steph asked from the door. She was pulling at her curly hair. Fine, Alina relented. But first you have to take your turn. Don't you want to see who your true love is? Steph rolled her eyes, but Alina stood firm. She wasn't going to move until they'd all gone. This time she wasn't even going to blink. She would make sure she didn't miss whoever's face appeared. Steph dragged her feet across the room and gave Alina another annoyed look before facing the mirror and half-heartedly rattling off the 13 Bloody Marys. But then something in her eyes changed. Her shoulders tensed and the annoyed scowl slid from her face, shock replacing it and maybe fear. However, before Alina could ask Steph what she'd seen, her mother's voice wailed through the house, vaulting up the stairs, hunting them down. The kids exchanged a quick glance and bolted out of the room. Alina was last, and as she paused to shut the door, she glanced one last time at the mirror, feeling it calling to her. She squinted, and she thought she saw something glimmer, page 10, in the glass. A shadow dancing in the reflection, swaying gently back and forth. She could have sworn she heard a low purr, a triumphant giggle. Actually, I'm going to stop right here at the top of page 10 because I only have 15 minutes and there's like 2 seconds left. So I'm going to stop this and we're going to start over with page 10.